Firstly, thank you for inviting me to speak. In preparing for Kabbalah Satira, preparing for Shavuos, I thought there's really a lot to say which we've never thought about in terms of the preparation for Shavuos. What does it mean to look at Klal Yisrael and say, why did we get the Torah? Why did Rabbi Hashem decide that he wants to give us the Torah? What made us worthy already? So we have to look at what's special about the character of Am Yisrael. The Gemara in Yevamos tells us that Am Yisrael are characterized by three special midas. We're Rachmonim, we're merciful, we're Baishonim, we're embarrassed people, and we're Goyim Chasodim, we're kind. And this comes as a bit of a surprise because everybody understands that compassion and empathy and kindness are qualities. Why is it a quality to be embarrassed? Baishonim. On the contrary, in our world, we hear of people having assertiveness training. They're taught not to be Baishonim, they're taught to be forward. Don't be so reticent, don't be so shy. Am Yisrael have got qualities, amongst our qualities that we're about Baishonim. To be worthy for Kabbalah Satira, we need to have the midas of Klal Yisrael. And one of the shocking things about the difference between our midas, our nature, our character, and the character of the nations of the world is expressed in one pasuk. It says, "V'hagivonim lo mibnei Yisrael heimo." The Givonim, that's a certain group of people, they're not from Bnei Yisrael. What does it mean? They're not. We know they're not from Bnei Yisrael. What does the Torah write? They're not from Bnei Yisrael. So Chazal explain, who were the Givonim? They were the Nasim. They were the people who pretended to have not come from Eretz Yisrael in order that they should be allowed to join us and not be killed as the other nations of Eretz Yisrael were meant to be killed before we entered the land. So they faked it. They pretend they came from very far away, and they managed to hoodwink, to convince Am Yisrael that, yes, we are genuine, we come from very far away, as they said. Once that had been established, there was no going back. It says, Yeshua made them chait ve'etzim v'shoy ve'mayim, he made them chop wood and shoy ve'mayim, that they would draw water. And these Givonim, this group of people, their descendants were very, very upset with Shaul HaMelech, with the king. Why were they upset with him in the times of Shaul HaMelech? Because Shaul HaMelech, and this is almost a section of Tanakh, amongst many other sections of Tanakh, which is extremely disturbing and very, very, very hard to give any explanation for. Shaul HaMelech wanted to kill his son-in-law David. David HaMelech, who wrote Tehillim, was literally a wanted man. He was a fugitive. He was running for his life. And while he was running for his life, a city called Noiv, which was an Ir HaKohanim, they let him take refuge there because they didn't know about the friction between David and Shaul. And Shaul HaMelech was very, very angry with them, and he killed off the whole of Noiv Ir HaKohanim. He killed them all, even though Shaul HaMelech was such a big tzaddik. It says he's ben shana bleichet. It was like but he did this for whatever reason. He killed Noiv Ir HaKohanim. The Givonim got their panosa from this city, and therefore they were very angry with Shaul that he had killed Noiv Ir HaKohanim, and they said, "We will never forgive you for what you've done to us, unless you do one thing: blood. Give us blood." What do they demand? The death of the sons of Shaul. Unbelievable. The only thing which will satisfy them is death, revenge. It's a horrific human weakness. There's a desire for revenge. And nothing would make them happy except vengeance. We want the death of the sons of Shaul. So about that, it says, V'hagivonim lo mimnei Yisrael heima. And the Rambam actually, Hilchos Tshuva says, whenever you're faced with a challenge of mechila, you should always remind yourself, this is the midah of Eden. This is what Jewish people have built in. We've got an advantage in this respect. We have within us the power of mechila. And when we don't, he says, the Goyim are leilev, they're not able to, the other nations can't. Let's see how this relates to our preparation for Shavuos and for Matan Torah. How we get ourselves ready. We know we have 49 days of preparation. We have the Sphira. What's it all about? What's the Sphira for? To try and get us to a point of total hachno, willingness to sacrifice our will to do the will of Hashem, which requires humility. The fact that when we were offered the Torah, the other nations of the world said, what does it say in the Torah? And we never asked, was because we had humility. We said, if Hashem wants to give it to us, we're ready. Am Yisrael didn't just say Na'aseh Nishma, they were also at a level of absolute unity. It was Ke'isha Echad B'leiv Echad. They were encamped by Yichan, like he encamped, not by Yachanu, because they reached this level because all separation from other human beings represents spiritual blockage. It represents the stubbornness of a person not willing to accept another person's right to exist or another person's right to have it his way or her way. I've got to have it my way or the highway. 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died at this time. It seems almost impossible for us to justify this. How could they die? What have they done wrong? They didn't give cover to each other. Does it say anywhere that if you don't give cover to somebody, you get killed for it? Of course not. So Loinogu covered Zela said that's why they died in the Magefa, and they died in a plague. So unfortunately, we now have a little bit of a concept of a plague. That's why we're on Zoom. No, seriously, this is why we're on Zoom, because there's a plague. There was a plague, there was a pandemic, there was COVID. So, until 2020, if somebody said a plague, you said, yeah, I did that Seder night, about plagues. And now, no, we've actually lived through a plague with so many korbanos, so many people died, and we were terrified, and we were stuck in our houses, we had lockdown. So we actually know there's something called a Magefa. 24,000 people died in a Magefa, in a plague. Mysterious plague. Where's the plague coming from? Everything has to come for a reason. That same Gemara I spoke about with the Gevonim, what does it say there? It says there that the whole reason David HaMelech came to talk to the Gevonim and try and make up with them, make peace with them, unsuccessfully, because the only way was with blood. But the only reason he did it was because there were 3 years of no rain. There were 3 years of rov, of famine. So David HaMelech knew that if there's a famine, if there's a crop failure, it's not to do with the weather. It's through the weather. It's not because of the weather. So we can never ever think COVID killed anybody. In the same way, if somebody died from a heart attack, the heart attack didn't kill him, it was just how he died. The reason he died is Hashem Me'enisam Chaya. So the Gemara says that David HaMelech was so mystified. Why is there this rob, this famine for 3 years? He was searching for a reason. They came up with 2 reasons. He was told. David was told this. One was that Shaul was not Nisbet Kalocha, didn't get a proper hesped. And the other was this story with the Gevonim that he killed Meger HaKohanim, and the Gevonim was so upset with him. So when 24,000 Talmidim Rabbi Akiva died, it's like a massive mystery. Like, who covered there? What's it about? So I saw recently mentioned the name of the Kubolim, not that we understand these things. There's something called a reincarnation, Gilgulim. Yeah. Maybe somebody knows something about Gilgulim. We don't know too much about Gilgulim. It says if you speak Lashon Hara, you get put into a dog, you come back as a dog. We don't want to be dogs in there. That's why they bark the whole time, because they're Gilgulim about Lashon Hara. So anyway, there's something called a Gilgul. So the Kabbalim say the 24,000 Talmidim of Akiva were the Gilgulim of the 24,000 people who died in the previous plague. Where was the previous plague mentioned in Chumash, where 24,000 people died? That was at the time of Baal Pa'or, Bilam. The Chumash tells us that Bilam tried to curse the Jewish people. He was hired by Balak, by Balak ben Sippa. He saw what was happening. He tried to hire Bilam to curse them. It was unsuccessful. So Bilam came up with an eitzah. He says, I have one way to destroy the Jewish people. If I bring immorality into Klal Yisrael, if I get these Bnei Ismail, these Bnei Midjan to come along, I'll be able to destroy Klal Yisrael. And it brought a terrible Magefa. And in that Magefa, it says in the Chumash, 24,000 people died in that plague. Till Pinchas came along, he stopped it. Through his bravery, through his Siyas Nefesh, he went and killed Zimri. He stopped the plague. But there were 24,000 people. They were the same 24,000 people who came back, reincarnated as a Gilgul. They came back at the time of Rabbi Akiva. And they were Rabbi Akiva's Talmudim, these 24,000 people. What does this mean? How can you explain it? And how does it give us some kind of insight into a practical, down-to-earth preparation for Shavuos? So I'm really trying to combine two things. I'm taking something very mysterious, esoteric, and lofty, and bring it into a really down-to-earth, lemais, a very practical thing. Tzadok says the following, Tzadok HaKohen, he says the following. We know that if somebody killed by mistake, he's Ritzech B'Shoigeg, he had to go and run to an Ir Mikvah, to a city of refuge. And Eretz Yisrael was provided with designated cities of refuge, where anybody who had made this terrible mistake, committed manslaughter, he killed somebody accidentally, he would have to go there. How long for? An undetermined amount of time. It was a sentence of being there. How long is the prison sentence of the Ir Mikvah? Could be a day, could be 5 days, could be 5 years, could be 50 years. It's until the death of the Kohen Gadol. No one could know beforehand how long. Maybe the next day the Kohen Gadol is going to be nifter, and then he'll go back home. It's not a fixed thing. It's dependent on the Mrs. Kohen Gadol. But it says there that there were 6 Ori Miklots in Eretz Yisrael and 6 in Evel HaYarden on the other side of the River Jordan. Who was on the other side of Evel HaYarden? 2.5 Shvatim, just 2.5 tribes. So most of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael proper, just a small number on the other side, and yet they have the same number of Ori Miklots. Why? So the Gemara says, Begilad Shchicha Roitzkim. In this place, there were lots of murderers. So Tzadok explains why. Who were on the other side of the river? Children of Yosef HaTzadik, Menashe and Ephraim. Yosef HaTzadik, 2 sons, only 2 children, just Moshe, Menashe and Ephraim, twins, and they were in this place. It's 2.5 tribes. It wasn't the whole thing. There was Shchicha Roitzim. Why? He gives a fascinating explanation. This helps us understand the whole thing of our Shavuos preparations. He says Yosef had to survive a very, very difficult test, a massive challenge. He's a 17-year-old boy. He's kidnapped, sold into slavery. He hasn't got a mother anymore. She's not alive. He's a Yosem, very attached to his father, sold into slavery in Mitzrayim. No spiritual influence there, anything which is positive, only the opposite. And he's able to be Nizgab, he's able to hold back from his Yetzer Hara, a 17-year-old boy. maximum Yetzer Hara. Why? He has a midah sisoy. He has a gevura. He has a power. Self-control. I hold myself back. I want to do something. I won't do it. I'm not letting myself do it. I'm strong. I'm tough. There's a downside to that midah. With that comes chaos, anger. With that you automatically have an inclination towards power. The goal is the power should all be self-control. The downside is the risk of controlling others. We have today, people use the term control freak, to control other people the whole time. Be manipulative, be strong. The strong person, he can be strong on himself. Is he strong on other people too? So Tzadok explains that's why Begilot Shchicharotzim, there are lots of murderers there. It's because they're from Yosef. And they have this Midas Hagvura, this very tough, strong, controlling streak. And the tough, strong, controlling streak is very, very important to protect from the Yetzer Hara of Aroyos, of immorality, of permissiveness, but it's got a downside. So perhaps one can suggest the following. These people, these 24,000 people who died because of the Chet of Baal Pa'or, they had shown a weakness that they couldn't resist these women. They couldn't resist. They gave in. So in their reincarnation, when they came back to the world, they were specially strong, especially tough. Then they're challenged in a different way. Are you going to be noyed covered zelazeh? Are you going to give honor to one another and respect to one another? Or are you just going to be tough, just strong? It says, Eineim tzoros zu b'zu, their eyes were tight towards one another. That means when a person is frightened of doing an Aveira, he's generally more inclined to nervousness and anxiety in case he does something wrong. So he also sees other people as a threat to him. Maybe this person will take away from my Avodas Hashem. Maybe this person is going to be a negative influence on me. Seeing others as a threat is really lack of emunah. Because in truth, we know, no one can take anything away from you that's meant for you. No one can take away your shidduch. No one can take away the house which is meant to be your house. No one can take away the job which is meant to be your job. No one can take away the friend who's meant to be your friend. We have a challenge in emunah when it comes to this eineim tzoros zu b'zu. When we left Mitzrayim, we're preparing ourselves for Shavuos, preparing ourselves for Har Sinai. What did we leave in Mitzrayim? We left behind the tumah, the spiritual dirt, the contamination of Egypt, the aroyos, the immorality of Egypt. But there's now a danger of Midas HaGvura that will have too much power, too much of a sense of strength, and too much pride. So then the avodah, the spiritual development of Klal Yisrael in the Midbar from leaving Mitzrayim to Matan Torah has to be towards Achdus. Achdus, unity, is the expression of how much kindness you have within yourself. How much generosity have you got? How much are you willing to consider the feelings of others rather than just your own feelings? Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahor was the epitome of unity in Klal Yisrael, which actually never happened before or since. Rashi says there in Chumash, Rashi says there in the Pasuk, he says every other encampment of the Jewish people in the desert was with tarumas or machloikas, with complaints, moaning, groaning. and fights, friction. And we're talking about Dodei, we're talking about the greatest of the greatest of the greatest. People who showed such trust and emun in Hashem. It says, they left Egypt, they're nothing. And they weren't nervous, they weren't scared, they just said, I trust Hashem, Hashem's going to take care of me. I don't need to be worried, I don't need to be anxious, I don't need to be scared about the future. Nothing nervous, nothing to make me at all worried or concerned. Absolute trust, reliance on the Rabbi Shalom. And yet, every single time in the midbar, fights. Complaints and fights. Exactly what that means, I don't know, but it's Rashi's saying something there for us to learn. And he says, at Har Sinai there was a Vayicha. Because they'd worked so hard on this ideal combination of both Chesed and Gevurah. The Gevurah, the strength to resist the pressure, the huge pressure of Mitzrayim, that they could come out of Egypt after 210 years slaves in this very spiritually hostile, very spiritually challenging environment where there's so much immorality, there's so much tumah, there's so much negativity, and they could come out and say, no, we trust Hashem, we rely on Hashem, we've resisted all those Averos. It says that besides Shlomis Bas Divri, never was there any immorality in Mitzrayim amongst Klal Yisrael. They did lots of other bad things. They were Oved Zorah. There's a Medrash Rabbi that Moshe Rabbeinu told the Am Yisrael, I'm going to take you out of Mitzrayim. They said, we don't believe you. He says, why not? Hashem said so. He said, no. He's not going to take us out of Mitzrayim. Every single place in Mitzrayim is filled with our idolatry, with our Avodah Zorah. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, when Hashem wants to take you out, he won't even look at it. He'll ignore the fact you've got all those. It's true. It's not made up. It's not like they're nervous or something like that. They're saying the truth. The whole of the land of Mitzrayim is filled with that. No, we can leave it all behind. Hashem still took us out. So we had this huge gevurah, the gevurah which was required even for a very obvious challenge, which was Klal Yisrael need to have bris milah. We're not talking about 8-day-old babies. We're talking about grown men having bris milah immediately before Korban Pesach, and then leaving Mitzrayim. You can't imagine how horrible it must have been, how frightening, terrifying it must have been. They all had to have a bris milah, and they had this gevurah as power. And the trust in Hashem, which is also a gevurah, but they didn't stay with that. They moved, they changed, they developed. Sphira is all about development, not being stuck. The thing that we most need to get ourselves ready for Shavuos is to get unstuck. Not to say, I am the way I am, I can't change. We can change. We got the Torah. Really, that might be a message in the Chazal that tells us how Hashem offered the Torah to the other nations. And they said, sorry, this isn't a good idea. Why? Because we are like this or we like that. You're telling us you're telling us the signal, you're telling us things, it's against us, against our nature. You know what Am Yisrael is saying? Whatever our nature is, we have the capacity to change. We can get this fantastic blend of chesed and gevurah. We can have both. They seem to be a contradiction. They are a contradiction, and yet we can have both. We can have chesed, we can have generosity and kindness and empathy, and we can also have that strength, that power, if we use it properly. The nations of the world say, no, we can't get the Torah, you can't give us the Torah. We're not made for the Torah. It doesn't fit our nature, our personality. You're telling us you're not allowed to do this, it's against my nature. I once heard the name Matziel Solomon, he once said, what would have happened if Am Yisrael would have said, Maksib, but what does it say in the Torah? Hashem might have said, you know what's in the Torah? The Torah says you mustn't talk Lashon Hara. And we would have said, oh, no, thank you. No, thank you. That's too much. You're asking too much of us. But we didn't ask it. And in fact, even if we would have asked it, we wouldn't have said that. Why? Because Am Yisrael understood. We, as a Jewish nation, we have the capacity of recreating ourselves. You can be an angry, nervous person who makes themselves into somebody calm and relaxed and patient, even though it's against the way you are. Because Torah really means teaching. It means I can learn. It doesn't just mean learning information. Torah is not just about information. Here's a book. Here's some information over here. There's 613 pieces of knowledge. No, the Torah is about changing. We have the capacity to change. And that was all part and parcel of the Na'aseh Nishma. So in our Yontif preparations, we also get ourselves used to the idea of Megillas Rus, where we see that the future of Am Yisrael, the perfection of Am Yisrael, will ultimately come from a lady who is from a nation that can't marry into Klal Yisrael. And Chazal tell us, no, it's only the men, it's not the women. It's Amoiniv lo Amoinis, Ma'oviv lo Ma'ovis. Why does she have to come from there? Why can't she just be a regular Jewish lady? Why has it got to be Dafka from there? Mashiach has to come Dafka through Rus, through David HaMelech, who's a grandchild of Rus. Well, not a grandchild, great something grandchild. A grandchild of Rus. Why does it have to be through that? So some Mepharshim explain it's because of the background. It says, why can't you marry into Ammon and Moab? They can never come into Kal Hashem. They can be Megaya. They can never ever come into Kal Hashem. So they do terrible things to us. Why do they do it? Because they were scared of us. They're very, very scared. Where does Ammon and Moab, where do they come from, these people? They come from the destruction of stone. There are two parts of our elevation from Mitzrayim. One is our Emunah, and the other is our Kedusha. We have Emunah, and coming out of Mitzrayim, we have Kedusha. We're sanctified. V'atem tiyuli mamlechas kohanim go kodesh. When Lot was saved from Sodom, and his daughters, of course, are from that saving, it came through both a Gevura and a Chesed. It came from a Gevura, a self-control, because Lot was in Mitzrayim and he could have told Paroi, the wife of Avraham Avinu is this lady over here, it's Sarah, and then Paroi would have taken her. But instead he kept quiet. It says that's what, Rashi brings Chazal, that's what Hashem remembered. It says, Vayizkar Kimus Avraham, and then he saved Lot from Sodom. That's what the bottom line was. It's Gevura. It's holding yourself back, controlling yourself. And yet the actual way in which he got taken out was through incredible kindness, an insistence on having guests, having visitors. You know, you can offer somebody to come to your house and they say, no, thank you. All right, fine. Good, let's move on. She said no. I asked her, she said no. Avram, Lot didn't take no for an answer. It says he pressurized the Malachim, he forced them more or less. They have to come and stay by him. Why? Because he's a Talmud of Avraham Avinu. He's not just his nephew, he's his Talmud as well. He knows Chesed, he knows what Chesed is. It's automatic for him. It wasn't even a schus, it's automatic. But the Hatzalah of the daughters of Lot and his family, the ones who were saved, was through this Gevura and this Chesed. So that's where Rus comes from. So the future Geula of Klal Yisrael is through this combination, the Gevura and the other side as well. Just like in Matan Torah itself, we have two parts of Matan Torah which seem to be a contradiction. We have Na'aseh and Nishma. We said Na'aseh and Nishma, we'll do and we'll listen. We're willing to do even before you've told us what it's all about. You want us to keep a Torah, we'll keep it. Na'aseh and Nishma. And then there's the other part, which seems to be an absolute contradiction to it. The Baruch pressurized them. He says, you've got to keep the Torah or else. Otherwise, you're dead. Otherwise, the world's finished. So what you see in those two parts, one seems to contradict the other. They're not a contradiction. There are always two elements in a person's life, Ava and Yira. There's love and there's awe. Yira doesn't mean being scared, it means awe, being in awe of Hashem, having tremendous respect for Kadosh Baruch Hu. Even relationships have to always be like that. You have a relationship with a husband and wife, you should also be with Ava V'Yira. There's tremendous respect for the person you're married to, and especially tremendous love. There has to be Ava V'Yira. That corresponds to the Nas of Nishma and the Harkegigis. That corresponds to the Chesed and the Gvura. To prepare for Shavuos, one needs a bit of both. I want to share with you a story which I read, which made a very big impact on me, which I felt is really relevant to this understanding, this appreciation of how the Midas HaChesed is related to Torah, how Torah requires the self-control and the sacrifice for other people. Phenomenal story. Many years ago, there was a young boy called Yosef who went to Cheder in his town with other boys his own age. And one day, two of the boys in his class got into a fight. And after a lot of arguments, the fight became physical and they started punching each other. And one child was even really, really hurt. And the Rebbe came along, the teacher came along and broke up the fights. But instead of being unbiased, he thought he knew who it was who was the perpetrator, who was responsible for the fight. And he grabbed that boy. The boy was called Yankel, and he smacked him, he hit him, and the boy was very, very hurt, emotionally and physically. And this Yosef saw it and ran up to the Rebbe and he says, how can you do that? You didn't hear both sides of the story. How can you punish one boy and let the other boy go? I think it's because this boy, Yankel, is a Yosem. He doesn't have parents. He's got no one to stick up for him. And the other boy is the son of a very wealthy, important, influential man in the town. You don't want to get on his bad side. You don't understand. It says in the Torah, Kol almona v'yosem lo yisa'anun, you must never cause pain to a widow or an orphan. When you're doing that, you're afflicting this orphan. He was so upset, this boy. He left the Cheder and he said to his parents, I'm never going back there. I don't want to be taught Torah by somebody who doesn't keep the Torah. I saw how he beat up this boy, and the boy was a Yosem, and he didn't even know who was responsible. His parents tried everything to calm him down, but they couldn't. He just wouldn't go back. So his father said, no, he won't go back to Cheder, I have to teach him myself. He was very proud his son had stood up for the Yosem, proud of it. But a short while later, this Yosef started, Lolein, to feel very sick. He became extremely ill. His parents took him to one doctor and another doctor, and no one could make him better. And it became so bad, they thought he was literally on the verge of death. And all of a sudden, this little boy, Yosef, he opened his eyes. His parents who were around him were shocked. He said, please, can you give me a cup of water? He made a bracha, a shahakol, and he said quietly, I'm not going to die. He closed his eyes again. He went to sleep for a few days, and then he opened up his eyes, and he was fine. So his family asked him, what happened? How did you know you were going to pull through? And he said, I'll tell you what happened. I felt my life slipping away. And then I felt the Malach HaMoves has grabbed hold of me. And then I saw I'm not in this world anymore. And suddenly a man appeared. It was a man who was wearing tachrichim, and he began to cry and beg in front of the Kisah Kovod. And this is what he said. No, you can't take this boy away from the world. He's a wonderful boy. If you take him away, who will stick up for my son Yankel? I'm Yankel's father, and this was the boy who ran to protect him when he got into a fight. So the Beis Din Shel decided to cancel the decree, and that's how I came back. That's how I knew I was going to live. Who was this boy Yosef? Who was he? His name was Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik. He was the Beis Halevi. And Rebel Soloveitchik, his grandson, said when he was very ill, and he was in hospital, he was in the ambulance going to hospital with his son, Alvin Chaim Chaim of Ram Yeshua, the Brisker Rosh Shiva. He said to him, my Zayda had the schus. He had the father of the Yosim to come and save him. Who knows if I'm going to have such schusim? But the story shows you the phenomenal power of chesed, of kindness. And if you think about what actually happened as a consequence, that the Beis Halevi lived because of that. So his son Reb Chaim Brisker lived because of that. So Reb Chaim's children lived, the Brisker Rov lived because of that. And the Rov's children, and now Baruch Hashem, his grandchildren who are Mabitz Torah, to literally tens of thousands of Talmidei Chacham throughout the world, and it's all from kindness. The preparation for Shavuos has to be through kindness. To prepare for Shavuos, we need to value Torah and realize that Torah is our focus, our aim. It's true, the Yontiv of Shavuos is a big challenge for us. Because for us, what's Shavuos? Just cheesecake. What's Shavuos? Pesach, I understand Pesach. It's Yism Shrine, it's a Seder, it's getting rid of the Chometz, it's eating matzah, it's talking about it's Yism Shrine. Sukkahs, I understand, there's a Sukkah, there's Arba Minim, it's a Simcha after Yom Kippur. But Shavuos, what's this Yontiv all about? This year it's even 3 days, not just 2 days. There's Motzei Shabbos. What's it all about? It's about our preparation. It's about our growing to the level of saying Nasiv Nishma, the level of saying I can get unstuck. And I think practically when we work on tolerance, we work on, like in this story, trying to save somebody who's got nobody to look after them, and trying to maintain the Yosef, the strength of self-control, never to think that I've got a terrace, I've got an excuse because of my environment. Yosef is really hitting us with that message. I've got no excuse because I can't say, well, I'm in such a place, what do you expect of me? Somebody says, well, it's not my fault, I'm by myself. It's not my fault, I'm not in a good place. It's not my fault, I've got this, I've got that, I've got the other. I have to face this challenge. All the terutzim are brilliant. They're fantastic. All the excuses are good. They're solid. Torah is about going beyond that. Klal Yisrael could have said in Mitzrayim, we've got every reason to just give up. Yosef could have given up. He could have said, look what my brothers did to me. Where's Hashem? Why didn't you look after me? My brothers want to kill me, and my brothers sold me as a slave. I can just give up. The inspiration of connecting to the people who didn't give up can help us in our Shavuos preparations. Even on a simpler level, we think about Sfira being a time when 24,000 Talmidim or Akiva died. You expect him to give up after that. He didn't. He started all again. Downsizing. His yeshiva had 24,000 Talmidim, the new one had 5. He downsized. He didn't give up. He says, yeah, I can't do what I did before. No, 5 Talmidim. The 5 Talmidim come back. And it says, the world was desolate. Why was it desolate? There was no more Torah. Once his Talmidim had gone, that was it. He didn't give up. I think in Golus generally, and today, and we live in a world actually filled with far too much news. The huge advantage of technology is we know everything. The huge disadvantage is that we know everything. It's the disadvantage as well that we know everything. We know everything. Yeah, we know there's a shooting in Texas. We know about this. We know about that. We know about lots of stuff which is going on, which is awful. We know about terrorist attacks. We know all sorts of things which make us so inclined towards giving up. We say Rabbi Akiva didn't give up. There was a horrific magefa, as somebody said, just think about the maths. Between Pesach and Lag BaOmer, 24,000 of his Talmidim died. Because every day there were 800 Levi's. 800 Levi's every day. So you'd have thought he'd be so depressed, so broken. These are his Talmidim. Rabbi Akiva is the one who said about After Kamoicha. It's a passing in Chumash. Rabbi Akiva says it's the Klal Gadol of the Torah. So for sure, Rabbi Akiva must have absolutely loved those Talmidim. So you'd have thought he'd be completely tzashos and completely gone, finished. 24,000 Talmidim were nifter, horrific tragedy. It couldn't be a bigger tragedy than that for Rabbi Akiva. No. He got up and carried on. He didn't give up. That should inspire us for Shavuos. I hope that these ideas and these messages we can try to put into practice will help us get ready for Kabbalas Torah, get ready for Yom Tov. Thank you very much for listening.